All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans, Malaysians, and I am Beast Mikey, have now arrived in my train of thought. It's time to talk about Week 6 in the NFL season. I can't believe we're already here. Let's not waste any more time and get to business. Now, there weren't too many beatdowns in this week, but there is one that started the week. I'm going to need the kids once again to help me with this one.
Stop! He's already dead.
Thank you very much. And let's talk about a relationship that has become the hammer and the nail. Normally, it is the Eagles playing the role of the hammer. They have bullied the Giants over the last few years, and the Giants have really been kind of submissive in this realm. It's not great, but it tends to happen. In this case, it was an Uno reverse card flipped by two rookies. It was Jackson Dart and it was Cam Skattebo, who have really taken the league by storm up in New York. They both have played well either. It's not even just New York hype. It's just a matter of Skattebo mowing down his opponents, and the latest victim being Zach Bond, along the lines of 3 tugs, and Jackson Dart, who is a mix of a decent passer and a fearless runner, who for some reason dives headfirst into cannon fodder and almost got himself concussed in the process. An incident that really sucked the life out of MetLife Stadium for a moment, because everybody involved, including Brian Daboll, were like hoping and pleading that he would be okay. And Russell Wilson, when he came on the field for a play or two, looked awful. So yeah, naturally Giants fans were hoping to the football gods that he'd be all right. Dart was okay. He came back and continued to run headfirst into cannon fodder. He'll learn someday. In any way, the Eagles' offense has learned nothing in terms of their execution over the last few games. And once again, they had to take it on the chin because they just couldn't do anything productively. Their play calling seems to be a miss, and the receivers aren't getting the ball like they need to. Neither is Saquon Barkley. Dallas Goedert's the only one really benefiting from this offensive drought by most of this team. Aside from that, it was a really good win for the Giants and a head-scratching 4 days for the Eagles, where there were 2 losses that were incredibly avoidable if they called better plays. They just did not. It wasn't all great for New York sports teams, because the Yankees owner Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and the Toronto Blue Jays proceeded to destroy the Yankees for the better part of 4 games. As much as Aaron Judge tried to help prevent such a thing from happening, he couldn't do all the work. And the Blue Jays found their way back into the ALCS for the first time since 2016. And now we're going to go overseas. And once again, we have to celebrate glory, glory, Tottenham Hotspur, as they hosted yet another game over at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and this time it involved the Jets and the Denver Broncos. Obviously the former New York, and the latter being Russell Wilson's former team. Well, most recent former team. In any event, this was a painful display of offense. The Broncos really couldn't do much of anything because they couldn't run the ball that well, and Bo Nix throwing it was not great. And he didn't make too many mistakes, though, except for the fumble on the opening drive, which was the Jets' first turnover force this year. The Jets didn't even turn over the ball. They were just not efficient in other ways, namely the offensive line and Justin Fields. The latter couldn't really throw a football productively offensively. The former allowed 9 sacks. Now, Fields is responsible for a couple of them because he held the ball too long, but it was still not a great day for Fields in the offensive line. So much so that their net passing yardage was -10. There were 55 yards lost in sack damage, as opposed to 45 yards thrown by Fields. And Garrett Wilson, who would normally catch some of these passing, have receptions for these yards, wasn't really around too much. And he may miss some time due to an injury. Not great. But where the Jets lost this game, despite the defense and special teams' best efforts, because they're the ones that scored the 11 points, where they lost this game was, in truth, the end of both halves. The end of the first half, they decided to do nothing for about 20 seconds, which was weird and puzzling and absolutely mind-boggling. Hilarious for those who don't like the Jets. And they did at the end of the second half was a matter of, we can protect Justin Fields, and if we do, we can get Nick Folk a game-winning kick opportunity. Back-to-back sacks later, Denver gets the ball on downs, and that's the end of the proceedings. 9 sacks, the latter 2 ended the game, and Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito and company saved the day for Denver, despite a really inefficient offensive one. Broncos take your win and fly back over to the States. The Jets, this may be another step to being 0-17. I'm going to stay in the AFC East, and I'm going to stay with Sean Payton jobs, as Peyton was employed by the Saints before the Broncos, and Jets and Patriots tend to play each other and don't like each other too much. Anyway, the latter team actually started this game pretty well, as Drake May and company got things going to continue the momentum going from last week's signature win against the Bills. To be fair to New Orleans, though, this is yet another experience and example of a team that is bad, yes, is very roster deficient, yes, but they will fight to the end, and that should be commended. That's something that Kellen Moore is actually instilling in this New Orleans team. With a competent roster, they might actually be something in a year or two. For now, they'll just lose these games, and try as Spencer Rattler might, he just couldn't get the job done at the very end with some bad throws at the very end of the game that all but ended the proceedings. Rather unfortunate stuff for New Orleans. And for New England, they did just enough to get the job done. It wasn't really Stephon Diggs this time. It was more of Drake May being proficient and getting the ball to Demario Douglas and company. And the Patriots got the dub and kept it moving. New England is in very good shape to make the playoffs. And who knows? They may even be hosting a playoff game. I'll get to that later. Now, during New England's reign of terror over the previous 20 years, this is before 2020, one of the victims were the Seattle Seahawks. And their neighbors, the Seahawks I'm referring to, are that much closer to their first trip to the World Series in franchise history. They played a classic game against the Detroit Tigers in what was the second and final start of Tarek Skubal's season in these playoffs. Well, in the ALDS, I should say. He made a spectacular start. He made 4 of them against the Guardians. He made 3 of them against the Guardians and the Mariners in these playoffs. And in this case, it was another spectacular performance. Dozens or so strikeouts by Skubal. He was completely untouchable, unstoppable. Detroit, you might have to open up them checkbooks and open them up hard. You got one more year before Skubal's a free agent. Have fun. Meanwhile, Seattle going to the ALCS after a classic. What did Seattle do over the weekend? I'll talk about it. I'm also going to talk about what the Seahawks did. And they flew across the country, which would be an NFC West team, to go to Jacksonville and play in Duval. And Byron Murphy set the tone for the defense. The first of 7 sacks came on the first defensive play of the game for Seattle. And to be honest, their defense really clamped up Jacksonville for the better part of this game. This was a very impressive performance by Seattle, who continued to play really good defense for the most part. Not last week, but they were in a shootout against Tampa Bay there. In any event, this was a great performance by Seattle's defense, and JSN continuing to own secondaries and defenders. Another 160-plus yards and a tug. 61 of those yards on one play. It was a great performance by Seattle all around. Mike McDonald and company's got them boys in shape. They're 4-2, and they're looking real good in the NFC West, which is very crowded. Now, Jacksonville's got the same record, but there's no shame, Jacksonville. You really have one team in competition, and that's the Colts. We'll get to them in a sec. But when it comes to Seattle, real good shape. And I don't just mean the football team. The baseball team also in outstanding shape. They went to Toronto, flying across 2 countries, and they brought their bats with them and beat up the Blue Jays. It was quite amazing to see. In Game 1, it was a bludgeoning. In Game 2, it was the remix, as Polanco was terrorized the Blue Jays for this series. Julio Rodriguez has a bomb. Cal Raleigh has a bomb. He almost got hurt in Game 2, but he was okay. And everything worked out pretty well for them. Seattle as a whole has continued to just scorch the Blue Jays, and they're up 2-0, heading back to Seattle for Game 3 starting tomorrow. Seattle has never been closer to the World Series than they are right now, where they have 5 games to win 2, and 3 of them at home if they need all 3. This could be the most raucous environment that the Mariners have ever played in. And this is counting the Kingdom days, where they had those monsters in the 90s. Can Seattle finally get to a World Series? Or will Toronto find their way back to the Sky Dome, whether it's 3-2 them or 3-2 Seattle? We'll see. Back to AFC South business and the Colts, where Indianapolis found a way. It wasn't easy, though. Even without Kyler Murray, Jacoby Brissett had a pretty good day, former Colt. And Jacoby Brissett threw for 300-plus yards. He was actually pretty good, so was Trey McBride. Arizona couldn't run the ball well, which wasn't great, but the Colts could. Jonathan Taylor did his part, another 100-plus yards and a couple tugs. Daniel Jones ran in a tutty. Good stuff there by Indianapolis. Tyler Warren caught a tutty. Again, good stuff by Indianapolis. And it was Arizona who had the lead late. All they needed was a stop. They just couldn't get that stop to close out the proceedings. This also would be a theme for the day on Sunday. And as this happened, the Colts would get their go-ahead score. This is Taylor's second. And ultimately, Brissett couldn't come back and answer. So this is yet another loss by one score by Arizona. They've had 4 straight of those. And in the case of Indy, you're 5-1 leading your division. You've got some crazy games coming up with Jacksonville. Let's see what happens, especially in the game in your House of Doom down in Duval. From one bird to another, and this is from red to black, because the Ravens are not looking great right now. This time, it was the offense that didn't show up, as opposed to the defense, which only allowed 17 points. Not terrible, but the offense only scoring 3, and this is with Derrick Henry having a good game. It's also not great. Unfortunately, it was not all sunshine and roses in a very, very dreary day in Baltimore for the Rams, because Puka Nacua got hurt during the game. He hurt his ankle. We'll see if Nacua has to miss time and all, and if he does, it's a devastating loss for the guy who I think is the offensive player of the year. Even though there is another player, and this one on a bird team, that could challenge for that throw. More on that later. In the case of Nacua, he didn't have that great a day because he was out early, and the Rams, though he did try to come back, didn't really need him, to be honest, because the Rams defense handled the rest. Snoop Huntley and Cooper Rush were no match for the Rams front line on defense, and they absolutely bum rushed Huntley. It was not great for Baltimore. For the Rams, they keep it moving and bounce back after losing a road game at LA. And for Baltimore, it's just another loss to what's been another lost season. It's a shame, really. We're going to stay with an LA team that flew across the country. This one flew from LA to Miami as the Dolphins played the Chargers in what is Tua vs. Herbert round 4. Now, there are several different things that happened here. The first half was relatively even. The Dolphins led at the end of it, but it was a relatively even half for both teams, where, yes, there were turnovers in the half, 1 apiece. There was a long run by Devon Achane, who was probably the best player on the field individually speaking, and by Vidal, who established himself as playing really well. He was the 4th string running back for the Chargers, proving once again that the Dolphins can't stop the run no matter who's running the ball against them. It's not great. And the third quarter, as we shift to the third, turned into a Charger quarter, where they dominated having the ball and scoring touchdowns. Several, plural. One by Ladd McConkey, one by Vidal, both receiving, and both from Herbert. It was not great. Tua threw an NO in between of that, and it was behind Achane. It was not a good throw. He stared down the safety yet again, and it was just not great. But then Tua and company bounced back in the fourth quarter after being rightfully booed at the end of the third. It was a really good fourth quarter for the Dolphins, as Tua had the ball twice and down 13 and got touchdowns in both instances. The first being to Achane, as Achane ran one in again, and then the second one to a wide open Darren Waller. Why the nearest Charger defending him was in Fort Lauderdale, I have no idea. But the point is, with 46 seconds to go, Miami made up a 13-point deficit, and it's 27-26. Just like last week, when the Dolphins played the Panthers, more on them in a moment, it was Miami's defense needing a stop to get the job done and get the win. That stop never came. With 46 seconds to go, the Dolphins gave the ball to the Chargers with good field possession, even though most kickoffs will do that. And I don't know why you don't have the Chargers kicker return the ball in some way, shape, or form. But in any event, Justin Herbert and company got down the field with relative ease, even though Herbert had to escape 2 sacks to make it happen. The first by Sealer, the second by Phillips. And Phillips' was probably way more egregious because Phillips absolutely had him dead to rights. Herbert had to switch the ball around, so he couldn't even get the strip sack fumble, which would have really made things bad for the Chargers. And in previous years probably would have happened because charging. And then he gets the ball to McConkey. McConkey avoids Dante Trader and then gets 30 more yards, gets out of bounds, saves the Chargers timeout, which they didn't even need, which is wild. And then they kick the game-winning field goal with 5 seconds to go. So the Chargers only needed 41 of the 46 seconds to steal the game from Miami. Rather unfortunate for the Dolphins. This would be another stamp on what was a terrible weekend, or week for that matter, for my favorite sports teams. Never mind the Flyers going 0-1-1 in their 2 games between Thursday and Monday. They did beat the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, ironically, last night. What a pass by Zegras. Anyway, that did happen. Never mind that. That's like the low end of the totem pole. This was painful for the Dolphins fans like myself. The Phillies game was incredibly painful, as the Philly season ended off a terrible error by Orion Kirkring when throwing the ball to first base gets you to the 12th inning and we move forward with a 1-1 tie. And then we'll see what happens. And then what happened on Saturday and Sunday with James Franklin and Penn State losing to Northwestern in humiliating fashion, and then Franklin basically being defeated with the press conference afterward and then fired the next day. Needless to say, this was not a good weekend for my favorite sports teams. Again, at least the Flyers won last night, which was good. I'll at least live with that, and we try to move forward. Speaking of favorite sports teams in the family, my dad was a Cowboys fan. That's the Paradise Dad. And his Cowboys went to Charlotte to play the Panthers. And to kind of continue the 6 degrees of separation thing, Rico Dotto dominated the Dolphins for 200-plus yards last week. Rico Dotto had 200-plus yards this week, but did it in a slightly different way. He only ran for 183. He was slacking. But he also added the 47-yard touchdown catch. So I guess we'll count that. This was a really good game between Dotto and company. McMillan scored, and Bryce Young was decent, though he did throw an inno. And then Dak Prescott, who was very good, no innos, and it was just him and George Pickens. Their rapport has been magnificent. Ferguson, too. They all played really, really well. Everyone on offense, pretty much. Neither defense could do really much of anything, and proof positive of this, Carolina said, you know what? We got the ball back with 6 minutes and 7 seconds on the clock, and we're just not going to give it back. The Panthers went right down the field and ran off the entirety of that 6:07 mark and ended up winning the game with a last-second field goal. This was as smart of a decision as I've seen in a while by a team who knows their defense can't get a stop and said, you know what? We're just going to make sure that your defense can't. Smart decision by Dave Canales and company to allow the Panthers to snatch the victory from the jaws of defeat, or at least another overtime game for the Cowboys. Carolina is now suddenly 3-3. Now, granted, the last two have been against terrible defenses, but you get the job done however you can get the job done. They scored 30 in 2 of their 3 wins, 27 in the other. Good stuff there. And for Dallas, it's a blown opportunity where they could have gained some ground on the Eagles and only been down a half game. Instead, you're down a game and a half, and this could have been avoided. From George Pickett's current employer to his former one, Steelers, Browns, and this was kind of straightforward because Dylan Gabriel threw the ball 50 times, and it didn't really get too far. It was not great, and it was a pretty bad performance by the Browns offense. So, to be fair, we've been used to that. Their offense is just not very good at all. Their defense is, and their defense did all that it could against Aaron Rodgers and company. It just couldn't do enough because Aaron Rodgers and company didn't make mistakes. They didn't do anything dumb. They didn't do anything ridiculous. They just were efficient enough to make sure that they can get down the field and score when they needed to. The younger Haywood would get one of the tutties, and the other one being a new receiver with a new quarterback getting more rapport. DK Metcalf continues to build his with Aaron Rodgers, and that's quite impressive to see over the last few weeks that Metcalf and Rodgers have done so well with each other. It's on the board that the Steelers are going to have this division wrapped up by mid-November, I should say. And it's because the rest of this division is downright awful. Baltimore's already 1-5, and so is Cleveland. And then we're going to get to the Bengals in the next few seconds as we stay in Ohio. Now, we're going to Green Bay with this game, and Joe Flacco's going to face the Packers again. It's the second time he's done so this year. He beat them as a Brown for their one win. And they were down 10-0 in both games, at least Flacco was. And it looked like, okay, this could happen again. After the Bengals basically suffocated the Packers in the third quarter with the football. They had it for 10 minutes and 17 plays. They finally scored on the last one. So it's 10-7, but then Green Bay gets it back, and now it's a 10-point game again. Not great. Ja'Marr Chase tried his hardest, though. Chase did his best with a spectacular catch to get it back to within a score. But unfortunately, Green Bay wasn't having it. They weren't having the rest of it. So the Packers promptly said, no, we're going to get this lead back up to 2 scores, and we're going to keep it that way. The Packers basically kept the Bengals at bay in the fourth quarter, winning by 9, and their defense did just enough. They didn't get the sacks that you would expect, considering Cincinnati's offensive line is not very good, and Flacco's basically a statue, but they did enough, and sometimes that's all you need. It was also good for teams in Wisconsin on Sunday because an hour after this game ended, the Brewers game started, and the Brewers proceeded to beat the Cubs over the head with bats again in Milwaukee. Home runs were hit by the Brewers, even though the Cubs started with one, and it did not matter because the Brewers hit more of them and ended up winning the series 3-2 and hosting the Dodgers for Game 1 of the NLCS, where the Dodgers came to Milwaukee, and unfortunately for the Brewers, they would lose. They would win the game and take home field advantage. Freddie Freeman homered in the 6th, And the Dodgers got an insurance run in the ninth, one of which they would need because Milwaukee would cancel out that run in the ninth. But ultimately, they couldn't do anything against Blake Snell. And the Dodgers bullpen, which got a bad rap going into these playoffs, has actually been respectable once they've begun. The Dodgers would hold it down and win the game and then go on to tonight's game, where we'll see if the Dodgers can win and do what Seattle's doing, going back to the West, up 2-0 with 2 games to win, with 5 to go, and 3 of them at most on the West Coast. We'll see if Milwaukee can hold and withstand this. Now, normally you would probably think, based on how smooth this video was gone, you'd probably be wondering, wait a minute, there's no transition for these football games between the Bengals and Packers and the Titans and Raiders, I should say. Oh, but there is one. It's Brian Callahan and former employers. I'll explain later. In the case of Callahan, he was in Cincinnati. He was calling plays for a number 1 overall pick who was highly touted. In Nashville and Tennessee, he was calling plays for a number 1 pick who was highly touted. And in both cases, neither offensive line was any good, and they both took beatings, Joe Burrow and Cam Ward did. The latter took the beating last Sunday as 6 sacks happened, and it was just a miserable performance by Tennessee's offense. Max Crosby said hello, though. And the Raiders basically didn't crash the car, and it was good. No offense intended, based on previous history. When it came to the Raiders, they just played decent ball. That was, Geno Smith did have his obligatory, it does happen, similar to Kyren Williams scoring touchdowns for the Rams, it happens. But in the case of Geno, it didn't really bite him that much. He did throw a touchdown to Mike Mayer, who's taking advantage of his time without Brock Bowers. Ashton Jeanty also scored, which is also good because that's really all they needed with just those two tutties. They added a couple of field goals too, that from Daniel Carlson, who's also really good. Anyway, this is a good win for the Raiders, who kind of needed to get some sort of footing, and obviously losing that game with a block kick was not great, but it was a good win for the Raiders to just get some sort of peace for people in Las Vegas. In the case of Callahan, this would be the final loss for Tennessee, and what's been another lost season for the Titans. Callahan was let go on Monday, and it was a pretty rough tenure in Nashville for Brian Callahan. He just couldn't coach. He's better as an offensive coordinator. I think that's just how it is and how it probably should be. He'll get another job somewhere, I think, as an offensive coordinator on a team that needs offense in the worst way possible. He's just not a head coach. I think that's all there is to it. Now, I've often said that Tennessee barely has an NFL roster. We can obviously see that the Niners have a very injured one. Tampa Bay does too, but not to the extent of the Niners. And when it comes to San Francisco, it got even worse. The best or second best player on that team, you can argue Christian McCaffrey in this situation, and Fred Warner had his ankle absolutely shattered. Dislocated, broken, however you want to call it. Some called it both. Either way, it's his ankle, and he's gone for the rest of the year, and it's a backbreaker for a Niners team that has been so resilient and has battled every other injury that they've had all the way through to this point, as they're now going to be 4-2. And not to spoil the rest of it, but the rest of this game for Tampa Bay was sponsored by Johnson & Johnson, as both receivers named Johnson scored tutties. And one of them did a backflip. It was quite nice. It was Tez who did the backflip. In any event, it was a good performance by Baker Mayfield as he continues his MVP case. And against Mac Jones, that we threw for a lot of yards, he also got bludgeoned. He got sacked 6 times, and Tampa Bay's pass rush was able to get home quite a bit against a Niners offensive line that's, just Trent Williams aside, not very good. It's a shame about the Niners, really. If they were healthy, they'd probably be the best team in the NFC. Maybe them and the Lions. But they're just not. And they're still 4-2, which is good. Tampa Bay is 5-1, which is impressive. And we're going to have to talk about their next opponent when it comes to the Lions. This is the game I'm going to talk about tomorrow in full. Monday night game. It's a main event game. It's another doubleheader on ESPN because, sure, I guess we're going to do that. Anyway, it's a showdown game that's going to happen between these two teams. And we got to talk about how Detroit got there. We got to talk about how the Lions won the toss and took the ball. And then went right down the field against Kansas City. It looked like they scored on a really ingenious trick play on a 4th down and goal from, I believe, their 2-yard line. It looked like David Montgomery threw the pass, his second touchdown pass of the year, to Jared Goff. He did, except Goff was in illegal formation because though he was in the backfield, he has to establish himself and stop for a second, and then it can get the snap off, and then we go. He never did establish himself. And with that, Detroit had to settle for 3. From there, Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs took it from there as their offense proceeded to shred the Lion defense. And I know they got some injuries back there, but it was still really bad by the Lion defense in terms of their efforts to stop Mahomes. 4 touchdowns total for Pat. He ran for 1 and threw for the other 3, the first of which being number 300. This one went to Hollywood Brown, who caught 2. Xavier Worthy with the other one. And Kansas City otherwise did a great job against Sonic and Knuckles, especially Knuckles. The only people that really did anything offensively were Sam Laporta and Jameson Williams, both of which scored, which is good, but the rest of the offense was kind of bogged down, to be honest. A very good defensive performance by the Chiefs to clamp up what's been the best offense in the league over these first 5 weeks. And for Detroit, no shame in this loss. It's fine. You're in good shape in a very competitive division. And I think you're going to be fine, but next week is a major test. I'm expecting a lot of points. And when it comes to this game for Kansas City, good work. You obviously got the Raiders next week. In theory, you should handle yours. But you got 3 more games against the Chargers and Broncos, and all of them are going to be important. That's going to be a fun race down the stretch. And now let's get to the Monday night games, from Kansas City's rivals in the AFC West to Kansas City's main rival in the AFC. We talk about the Bills, who, like the Chiefs, had a primetime loss that was not great. And they had to kind of lick their wounds and recover here. In Buffalo's case, they played kind of sort of a de facto home game because a lot of Bills fans showed up in Atlanta, and they showed out in Atlanta. And then they saw their run defense not show up in Atlanta. 200-plus yards given up on the ground. Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier absolutely mowed down and mauled the Bills' run defense. Algier bulldozing people. Bijan Robinson running by people. And then when they weren't running the ball, Drake London was catching it, and he was absolutely cooking the Bills secondary. It was not great. Mike Penix was nowhere near as bad as he was against the Panthers. He was actually pretty good in this game. And the Falcons did their damage, and really, defensively, they were just good enough. Not awful in any way, and not overly spectacular, but great enough to keep Buffalo at bay and keep Buffalo away from them by 2 scores or so. Great performance there. Josh Allen threw a terrible Lino at the end, but okay, he was desperate. He had to think of something. It just didn't work. It just wasn't going to happen. Not with the way Buffalo has played. They've been really sluggish over the last month or so. So these losses are going to continue to build up as long as they play sluggish, as long as the opposing team doesn't make catastrophic errors. When that happens, then Buffalo's in deep trouble. The Bills should be fine, but they're not in first place because New England's got tiebreaker on them, and they're both 4-2. Suddenly, the AFC East could get a little bit more interesting. There was one other Monday night game, and it featured the team that Atlanta last beat before last night, and that would be the Washington Commanders, who played Chicago in what was a very ugly weather game. It was one of those classic old-school type of football games John Facenda would probably narrate and do really good at, because of course he did. This game is really more so about DeAndre Swift, who had a spectacular performance. 100-plus yards on the ground, 65-yard touchdown through the air. Well, he caught the ball and did a lot of the damage. But the point is, this is a great performance by DeAndre Swift, who needed to continue to do his thing. Because DJ Moore was hurt and he hurt his groin. We'll see what happens with his health going forward. The former hurt my fantasy chances of winning. The latter also, well, I didn't start the latter, so it didn't hurt me that badly. But the point being, the Bears played relatively well. They just were losing down the stretch as Jaden Daniels played his second game back. He played a pretty good game. And the Bears were down 2 with the clock winding down. All the Commanders had to do was hold on to the ball. Well, getting the ball after a snap is probably the first way to do so. Daniels fumbled the snap. The Bears recovered the ball. And in the last 3 minutes and change, the Bears had the football and ran the rest of the clock out as they were close to field goal range from that fumble. The Bears did the rest as they got into enough of a range where the weather couldn't affect it. And it was Jake Moody. You may remember him from missing many kicks in San Francisco. He made the golden opportunity work in Chicago, at least for Chicago, in DC. He buries the extra point effectively, and that's the game. The Bears win a game they probably shouldn't have. The Commanders lose a game they probably shouldn't have, and they, like the Cowboys, blow a golden opportunity to gain ground on the Eagles. So even though the Eagles lose, they didn't lose any ground because the teams that they could have caught them ended up also losing. So no harm done to the Eagles in their situation in the NFC East. For the Bears, you keep up at least with the Vikings and the Packers and the Lions, because the Division of Doom is very serious. Who would have thought the Giants would be the one team to win in the NFC East this past week? Anyway, my picks were kind of meh, which is unfortunate, but it's the truth. It was an 8-7 week for my picks, and overall, I am 54, 38, and 1 for this NFL season through 6 weeks. Coming up tomorrow, Power Rankings. There will be some changes, obviously. A new number one more than likely. Tampa Bay and Indianapolis. You two are fighting for the first spot. Who's getting it? Where will the Eagles, Bills, and Lions fall? Because all three of them lost and lost in different ways. What about the bottom of the rankings? Who's going to be in zombie tier? And honestly, I think there's a new entry that needs to be in it and a team that will not be in zombie tier that should not be there. But one thing will not change. It is that the Jets suck. And it'll be the first stop of my next train of thought.